enslavement. My second great grandparents were. Um, my second great grandfather was about 20 years old when slavery ended, as my second great grandmother was 10. So that's them. And these people, I don't have pictures because this is the early 1800s right here. But these are my third great grandparents. This is their marriage certificate. You might be able to see, I know it's in cursive, but they got married in 1870. And this is to them right here. This is their names, William Pound and Patsy Williams. So I found out my three times great grandfather was born in the Dominican Republic and was sold into slavery in the United States around the mid 1800s, like the mid 1800s. So because slavery became illegal earlier there than here, a lot of times people that didn't really want to lose any money, since they either had to breed people, so they would just sell them. So they got sold here. This is the plantation that my third great grandparents were on. It's in a city called Afula, Alabama. And this is a picture of the plantation that my second great grandparents were on, which is called Turnwald Plantation. And this is in a city called Eatonton, Georgia, which is about an hour from where I live now, which that was also really interesting because I just didn't know this my whole life until basically last year. And I just felt like this is such to me, it's kind of empowering because some people might look on enslavement as like, this is just a sad situation that happened. But to me, it's very enriching because it just makes me feel like this is this is what they had to go through, and this is where I am now. So I just feel like this is such a good experience. Not that that was good, but just the fact it makes me feel good knowing they were able to persevere through all of that. Because I don't know if that's something personally that I could have did or a lot of people now. I don't know, but I just look back on it as a very powerful thing. Okay, so this a brief history of the slave trade. The first ships left the west coast of Africa in the early 1600s. It was really the 1500s, but those aren't as well documented because there was enslavement in the United States in the 1500s. But it really started to increase around this time. So people went from over here to South America, the Caribbean, the United States, and even Europe. So this is when people started to disperse. It's called the diaspora or the Middle Passage. And if you focus in on more of the antebellum slavery in the United States, we can see that slavery was not just only in the South, it was also over here, and even there were even slave people in California, because pretty much anywhere they could get away with doing it is where it happened. So it's always like, oh, the South was it, but no, it was everywhere, unfortunately. So I want to kind of fast forward to a story about a man named Nat Turner. I don't know if you have heard of him, you put in the chat. I want to see later, but I can't see. But Nat Turner was an enslaved man born in 1800, and he led one of the most well-known slave rebellions. And it could be considered somewhat successful because it did inspire a lot of other rebellions, but he was captured for it and he was sentenced to be hung. Not only was he hung, but after they killed him, they dismembered his body. And they did that because they wanted to make a statement, because to do something that powerful, especially with all the oppression that was going on, for someone to persevere like that, it really felt like a defiant thing. So they dismembered his body and they sold his body parts throughout the country, maybe even internationally. The only body part they have left of him now is his skull right here. So nobody really knows where the rest of his body is now. It probably wasn't destroyed because a lot of Black people's body parts were sold, which I'm going to get into later. So it sounds, when you think about it, you kind of see the insanity that was the mindset of enslavers, because it wasn't just that enough that they would just have the person to a slave. No, they wanted to control the person's body wholly, because they did not see enslaved people as humans. They just didn't. That's why it was called. They were capital, just like a cow or a sheep or anything. They were just the property of the person. So they felt like they could do anything they wanted to, which is why all those things happened. Another person I want to talk about is Sojourner Truth. She escaped into freedom in 1826, and she's most known for her Ain't I a Woman speech, which was, it happened at the Women's Convention in Ohio in 1851. And basically, she got up on stage and she spoke in front of a mostly white female audience. And she was saying that as much as they're trying to talk about women's rights and everything, it's a lot of times Black women weren't included in those conversations. So she was saying, "Ain't I a woman?" because really she wasn't treated like a woman. A lot of Black people at the time were degendered, which I'm going to get into later. So even though like she made a statement in there about women that were getting their hands held when they got into a carriage or when they stepped off the side of the curb, Black women didn't receive that type of chivalry at the time. So her thing was like, "Ain't I a woman?" So that was her point, and it was a very pivotal moment. Ida B. Wells came a little bit after her, well, a while after her, and she co-founded the NAACP, and is most known for her anti-lynching crusade. She did a lot of work in the United States, and I think she was mostly around like California and things like that. So yeah, she's also a little known person that I think is very influential. I see some comments. Can somebody read the comments or questions? I can't see them, but I saw that they got put in the chat.
Oh, sorry, Cheyenne. I was just dropping a link about Sojourner Truth in the chat, just to give folks a little bit of context. That her actual speech was rewritten. It was actually sort of distorted by a white woman who crafted the transcription. So just a link in there that kind of breaks it down, since her first language was actually Dutch.
Yeah.
And that's an important part of the narrative too.
Thank you. Okay, and this is what I want to talk about, Black Americana. So Black Americana is the term that's used for all of these items that you see, well, as far as like this and these things. And the term is kind of odd because it's making it seem like when you think about Americana or the way it sounds is like almost something that's celebrated, but it's really coined for any of the terms any of the items that had depicted Black people in a negative way. So as it became less common for Black flesh to be actually consumed, because this is another thing. Not only did they just sell the body parts, some of those people would eat Black people's bodies as well because they wanted to consume Blackness. It's a very deep issue because as much as they did not see us as human, they wanted us in their houses, they let us raise their children, and they literally wanted to eat us, which there's a book called The Delectable Negro, which has both fictional and real accounts of the cannibalism that was going on at the time. So this kind of explains why you used to see food that would have these odd Black stereotypes on them because they still wanted to have that idea of it. Because I really put this section in here because I wanted people to understand the origin, because you just see the stuff, but you don't really know where it came from or why this was even done. So it was not rare to see these types of things. Yes, this is another origin. So the watermelon and chicken stereotype came from during Reconstruction when Black people were starting to support themselves a little bit more. So they would either sell watermelons or maybe sell some chickens because chickens were the only animal that Black people were allowed to use or grow most of the time. When they did, even on the plantations, they would be able to have maybe a garden for themselves and a few chickens. So if that's all they could grow and eat, that's what they chose to eat. But this became mocked, especially the watermelon, because it was, for example, it could be like, just like you see the man on the picture here, it would be a family just sitting out, just selling, trying to make a little bit of money. And that became a joke. So the same with the chicken. And you're going to see it became a pattern. Anything Black people enjoyed or did beneficial for themselves got turned into a joke as a way to further demean them. The mammy stereotype. So the mammy stereotype came from the fact that a lot of Black women, especially older Black women, would take care of the household or the plantation houses or even other white children. Black women were even responsible for breastfeeding white children. So you can see like they don't have Aunt Jemima like that no more, but it used to be a very grotesque depiction of Black women. So you can see here and here. And then also I have one that is, this is where I turn my video on. Okay, can you see me now? I have a jar from at least the 1950s that was passed down. I know it might be dark in here, but are you able to see it at all?
I can make it out, yeah.
Yeah, so if you can see how it's like it was always like portrayed as a very like overweight Black woman with red lipstick that's just excited and very jovial and maybe loud or always like fussing at the kids. That was the stereotype that they portrayed, even though they had these Black women in their houses. So like I said, it's a very hypocritical mindset to have, you have this woman in your house, but you're making fun of her at the same time. So, yeah. So, like I said before, Black success was mocked. So there was a stereotype called the Zip Coon Dandy, which made fun of, as you can see on this picture, Black men that dress well, because right after construction, when Black people were able to own their own businesses and start to get on their feet a little bit, they wanted to dress well. And that got turned into a joke because they felt like they felt intimidated by it because like they didn't understand like how these people were able to persevere and fit in as well as they did. So anything that could cut their confidence down, they would try to do that. So something, and also it comes from, if you ever heard like an old minstrel show type of thing, you'll see how they have the Black man with a very distorted speech, using a lot of words out of context. That also came from education getting better and Black people finally being able to read. So them speaking standard English was also seen as a joke. Just anything to cut their confidence down was just made into a mockery. So if you look at old pictures around the time of enslavement, you can see that a lot of Black women would have their hair covered. And it was because in states like Louisiana, it was illegal for Black women to show their hair. Like you can see in this picture that I have here. It was also done not only to dehumanize, but strip Black women of their femininity, because it comes from the long history of Black hair being policed, and this is kind of where that started. So it was really, the reason why it was illegal was because a lot of the times before Black women started wrapping their hair, some cultures did it anyway, just because like it was hot or you might not want to hair in your face while you're working. It was seen as very alluring and attractive to a lot of the white male slave owners. And it was really white women at the time that came up with that law. Even though it wasn't a law widespread, it just became so common because they didn't want that hairstyle and those hairstyles to attract the men. So this kind of goes into why Black hair has such a long history and why it's such a complex issue. So some of you may know Gary Morgan. He's the inventor of the traffic light, gas mask, and he also invented one of the first chemical hair straighteners, which is called relaxer. A relaxer is a cream or liquid chemical that is when it's put on Black or Afro textured hair, it straightens it out chemically. It chemically loosens the bond so that hair can never go back to being curly again until it grows out. Madam C.J. Walker is also a self-made entrepreneur, and she's credited as being one of the first Black female millionaires, and she was also a part of the hair care empire. And a lot of the reason why these products took off so much is because it wasn't only about trying to maintain your hair, but a lot of it is rooted in like, if I can get my hair straight, I might be seen as more white or more accepted, even in the Black community, because it's still like that now sometimes. If a Black person doesn't have their hair, it's changed a little bit, but it's always considered somewhat more desirable to have your hair straight and long. Even though our hair isn't even meant to be like that, some people are like that naturally, it was always trying to get somewhat closer to whiteness. The same with skin lightening creams, which were sold, they aren't as prevalent now in the Black American community. Some other countries like the Caribbean or actually on the African continent, they are still popular because a lot of people do lighten their skin, but it's also very dangerous because the main ingredients in skin lightening cause cancer. So people are willing to risk that just to have their skin a little bit more white. So I just want to go into a little bit more deeper detail about that. What we have here is a steel hot comb. So at the time, the hot comb would be placed in an open wood fire, like in a fireplace usually. And it would be heated up to a very high temperature, and it would be allowed to cool slightly. And then you would take at the root or the ends of the hair and just press it out until it gets straight. This was also a very painful process because people just really they had a strong desire for their hair to be straight. And they will go through almost anything to get it, because I've had my hair hot compressed before, and it is a very painful experience, which is why a lot of people aren't doing it anymore. So they would do that along with the straighteners. Men would do it as well. I didn't include any pictures, but it was also about around like the 30s to early 50s. Black men also straightened their hair, and they would slick it down, which is like the fried dyed and laid to the side saying. That's where that came from. But over time, these trends did start to change. But you can see this is around the 50s and 40s. Black women had their hair very straight and very slicked. You can see an advertisement for hot combs and things like that. But around the late 60s and 70s, this idea changed because it was called the Afrocentric movement. So Black people were starting to not put all the chemicals in their hair and not straighten it. So it was called the blowout kit, and people would sometimes the blowout kit did, however, contain some chemicals because it would loosen the curl slightly to make it just a bigger afro. So it still was slightly chemically altered, but it wasn't completely straight. So it would just they would call it softening, but it's really slightly straightening. They would just make the curl a little bit more loose. So that way it would appear bigger and fluffier, because that's also what made more of a statement. So you could see pictures of like men who were in like the Black Panther Party, or even just people that weren't trying to make a statement. It really became more of just about fashion. But a lot of people did wear it as like a way of Afrocentric expression. And it was also at the time surprisingly seen as an act of defiance, because for so many years, Black people wanted their hair straight for at least like the last 50 years before that. So to see people now doing that was a really big change. So this is a little bit more recent. There's around the early 2000s, people started to use a lot more weave, which is synthetic hair. You can see on these pictures, all of these are pretty much, this is all fake hair. This, and also as well as chemicals starting to come back, the relaxers came back. You can see the Jerry curl, which was a 1980s hairstyle, as well as these. So these all still altered the texture of the hair, or just completely changed it. So if somebody gets like a sew-in, which is when the natural hair is braided down, and they use hair that's on like a thin strip of like plastic, which is called a track, and it's sewn down into the braids of the hair. Micro braids would just intertwine synthetic hair with the real hair just to achieve. It's considered a little bit more acceptable as far as Afrocentric to have braids, but at the same time, it's still using a synthetic hair texture. So it's kind of it was bordering on the line of like, are you trying to still get close to whiteness, or are you trying to accept yourself more? So in more modern times, a lot of Black women are embracing their natural hair, but they also are still using like synthetic hair like this. It's a lot of like vibrant hair colors are very popular. A lot of women are starting to wrap their hair again as hairstyles. So it's really just, it's dramatically changed because a lot is more acceptable. Also, I picked this picture for a reason. This woman is of a darker skin tone, and she has hot pink hair, which about 50 or 60 years ago would have not been okay, because it was thought that Black women who have darker skin should not wear bright colors. So if you saw a darker Black woman who had like lime green or yellow on, they might have got made fun of, because it just was this idea that if you're dark, you need to be a little bit more toned down and not have, not be as expressive with yourself. So transitioning a little bit, This is Billie Holiday. She was a famous jazz singer, and she wrote a song called Strange Fruit. I don't know if you all can see it. I might move a little bit so you can see the lyrics. And this song was written in response to all of the lynchings that were going on at the time. As you can see, I'll move this a little bit so y'all can see better. I didn't want to put an explicit graphic lynching video or footage because I felt like everybody's seen that at this point, so it's not really a reason to show that. But lynchings were really seen as like a fun event for the family, which is why you would see children or babies. They might be grilling something and eating while the person's dying and being set on fire. So this was almost just a pastime. Like it was just like watching a TV show. So as you can see in this picture, how everybody's just sitting there, some people were smiling, some people were excited. It was like a fun event for them. So she wrote that song because it was such a prevalent thing going on that she wanted to make a statement about it. Also, a main thing about lynching, usually you wouldn't see like multiple Black people getting hung at the same time. They would always choose a Black man who was by himself or maybe with one other person, but usually it was them by themselves because they knew that they were more likely to get the person if they were alone. Nina Simone also wrote a song that was considered a protest song, which is called Mississippi Goddamn, which was written in response to the Baptist church bombing that killed 4 Black girls in Alabama, in Birmingham, which was also one of the more tragic events of the civil rights movement, because when people hear about these things, especially happening to children, it kind of would flip a switch as opposed to it just happening with adults, which was also tragic. But when they started attacking children, it changed the complexity of the situation. So, in another transitional period, I want to talk about Hank Aaron. I don't know how many people have heard of him. A lot of people hear about Jackie Robinson for desegregating baseball, but Hank Aaron is also very prevalent. A lot of people talk about Jackie Robinson more is because sometimes a lot of Black people at the time were excited to just have one Black person in major leagues compared to just having the entire Negro League, which was all Black. Hank Aaron is very important because he's most known for breaking Babe Ruth's home run record. But what's less known about him is that he received hundreds of death threats throughout his entire career. Even up to the point of him dying, he was still receiving death threats. So you may or may not be able to see them here. Well, this is his secretary that would actually hide the death threats from him after a certain point because she felt like it wasn't good for him to get that constantly, that having that negativity, because he knew that people were saying things about him. Nobody ever did make an attempt on his life, but it was just constantly saying, we're going to get you. We know what city you're going to be in. We know where you live. We're going to do this to you and do that to you. So you can see, if you might can read some of them, but you can see the language that was used in it was explicitly. And it got so bad at a certain point that the FBI had to get involved because they were taking these threats very seriously. But on the happy side of his career, he is a Black legend because he did beat the record. So my mom could talk about that a little bit because she was actually there on the day that he broke that record. Because I don't want this all to be sad because I feel like it's kind of been heavy so far. But I'm mixing this in because I want to show that it wasn't just constantly Black people being oppressed for 400 years and all of a sudden we get a certain president and everything's fine. No, it was happy moments going on, very joyous occasions that helped push us to where we are now. So Ma, do you want to talk about that a little bit this day?
Oh yes, I'd be pleased to. I hope everyone can hear me. Am I muted? I don't know.
We can hear you.
You can hear me. Thank you. Yes, actually, it was pretty much
we can't hear you if you're talking.
On my mother's side of, I didn't hear you.
We can hear you now, but the sound cut out.
Oh, okay. They said my internet thing was unstable. I don't know what happened. Hopefully it's better now. But I was just saying my whole family attended. It was 1974. We all went that night when he was, they were anticipating that he would break the record. He was at 714, and we all attended. And just the interesting part to show how some prices have changed. The price of that ticket was just over about $5 for each of us to go. And we were very excited. It was just, you could just feel the energy. Pretty much if those people, some people weren't here, but year before last when the Braves won like the World Series, or it's been any sporting event or any event you want to go to where the crowd is just in a frenzy and everybody's just so excited. That's the way I could best translate to you how we felt when he broke that home run record. I mean, the whole place just exploded with this excitement.
Yeah, because it was a really big deal. Even same things that might be seen as small were always very monumental to us, because for so long we couldn't really get anything. But when we were able to get something as big as this, it was a very joyous occasion.
It was very exciting. We took an entire row of seating, all my family and us, we jumped a whole row to seat at the stadium.
And up until he died, Hank Aaron was still a very big person in Atlanta. Like, there's a street named after him that we would go on frequently right by where the old Brave Stadium was. You might see people that still have on Hank Aaron jerseys, like it's a sports day at school. So he was just a very important person to a lot of people in our state. I want to talk about Muhammad Ali because most people have heard of him, but a lot of things people didn't know about him is that he was banned from boxing, which is why he had to end up boxing for so long. And some people may attribute that to why he ended up with his condition because of all that trauma from his sport. But Muhammad Ali was a very influential person because he was one of the first Black men to be very flashy with in his profession. So a lot of them would just like kind of play and be kind of humble about it. He was a humble person in his personal life, but because he knew his status was and he knew that he couldn't really be beaten, it caused him to have that flair that attracted a lot of people to him. So another thing that people in other media don't like about him is the fact that he didn't go when he was summoned for the draft. The reason he didn't go is because he felt like there was no reason for a Black man or really any person to go over to Vietnam and kill people for a war that really had nothing to do with them. The same thing happened with the Korean War. A lot of Black men didn't really see the point in going over there because neither Vietnam nor when Korea was one country did anything to Black Americans. It was the white Americans who had racist ideologies that were doing things. So it was like it wouldn't make any sense to go over here and harm these people when they haven't done anything to us. So a lot of people shared that sentiment, and his ideology started to spread. And another thing that happened around this time is he converted to Islam. So in this picture here, you can see a young Muhammad Ali with the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I don't know how many people have heard of him, but he was the leader of the Nation of Islam after their founder, W. Fard Muhammad, started the organization. He's one of the first known leaders because they had him, but he kind of took over that knowledge. And if for those who don't know, the Nation of Islam is a Black-centered Muslim religious group. I don't think that it's strictly Black because there are people who are non-Black in the Nation of Islam, but it was focused on helping Black people do for themselves. So a lot of Black people at the time, because this was around the 60s and 70s, were starting to join the nation because they felt like the ideology that they were pushing was very helpful as far as like defending themselves and doing for self, having their own businesses. So once he got around Elijah Muhammad, he started to kind of change what he was doing. And that was also another reason people were looking at him in a negative light, even though nothing he did around that time was negative, depending on your opinion. So I want to kind of move over into education. Let me just down a little bit so you can see. So HBCU stands for Historically Black Colleges and Universities. These are institutions created because Black people weren't allowed to go into the only other colleges, which were white colleges. some people now refer to them as PWIs or predominantly white institutions. So they started this order to educate themselves and have a safe environment to learn. So you can kind of see some of these pictures over here of some Black college students. And then we have down here Booker T. Washington, who's most known for his book Up from Slavery that he wrote in 1901. And he's also well known for his work at Tuskegee University, which is a university in Alabama, Tuskegee, Alabama. And in that university, he helped build it because he was also a teacher there. He taught classes on bricklaying and certain like labor skills that a lot of Black people already had, who may have been, not ones that came out of enslavement because that was in 1865, but like the sons and daughters of those people who had those skills because they might have came from a farming family. He wanted them to come there and learn and capitalize on their trade. The other person that I have listed is William Edward Bogart Du Bois, most commonly referred to as W.E.B. Du Bois. And he was a sociologist and civil rights activist, and his book was Souls of Black Folk. It wasn't his only book, but that was his most famous one. And he also kind of came up with the talented tenth ideology, which in short means that the top 10% of Black people would be able to uplift the other Black people that weren't as fortunate. There was another man named Marcus Garvey who didn't necessarily agree with that because he felt like everybody should be helping each other, not just the top people who were the most educated helping everybody else. So Ma, I think you're able to speak on this a little bit more since this is something you studied.
Yes, they did have some conflicting ideologies but Mr. Washington, he was saying that we should utilize what we have and have opportunity to receive. However, W. Du Bois was of a different philosophy in saying that we should be able to go into work or areas that were of the predominant race. So far as Blacks should be able to do that any thing that they wanted to do, so far as not wanted to do, but should not be hindered from doing non-laborers work if they wanted to go into the areas that were not work that was required, more labor intensive work, if you wanted to do something that was non-labor intensive. And Mr. Washington wanted to go into saying that while we should have that opportunity, also take advantage of what we have and using those skills that we did have as opposed to purchasing things from others. Because that's why when he had started Tuskegee and worked to build it there, Cheyenne mentioned he had a brick lane there, he grew gardens there. So you could utilize and in turn sell that to people for demand and then go on to make your own independent businesses. And as well as she mentioned with Mr. Garvey, he also his goal was to make Blacks more independent as well.
Yeah, so this kind of goes into a lot of divide that people still think about because some Black people feel like that we should have it kind of started around, this is kind of the root of it. Some people felt that we should just stick to ourselves and build our own like communities. And then other people felt like we should just, because we have a right to, we should also assimilate into these white areas and white communities. And a lot of issues that came with that was, some people say it was detrimental that Black people fought for desegregation because depending on who you asked, it felt like it didn't really get us anywhere. When we were building, we had cities like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and other places, the Black, which is called the Black Wall Street. So you had schools, you had grocery stores, all of the necessities were pretty much covered in some of these areas. But some people always felt like that just wasn't enough because they just felt like to really succeed, you had to be assimilated among the white community. So it's still going on because people just feel like, some people are now getting back to that. Like other people, there's a lot of Black people that are buying land and they're opening farms. They're kind of going back, you could say it going backwards, but not going backwards in terms of a negative, going back to where the roots were, doing for themselves, which some people say is positive, but then other people are saying we should just keep going to college and just try to get good job and do all of that. So it really is a toss up, and it kind of just depends on what works best for the individual. So currently, HBC, there are about 100 HBCUs in the country. You can kind of see right here, I included this picture because band culture is really big at HBCUs, and even in like Black high schools, because if I can kind of sidetrack for a minute, in my experience, I always went to school that were majority Black. My elementary school was, my middle school was not, one of my first high school was not, but my finishing high school in 12th grade was. We had one white student and she moved, and then we had maybe 3 or 4 Hispanic students. But the schools were always completely majority Black. So I feel like my experience has kind of been biased because I haven't had to experience some of the things that people who weren't around majority Black people were. So like certain things that happen in school, and this is another side note. For those that don't know, I am an educator. I teach full time, but now I'm just substitute teaching. One day I went to a middle school that was in a city that is about an hour outside of Atlanta. It's in a county that's pretty diverse, but this particular school was not. And I remember something felt kind of off about the school, and I saw a lot of weird dynamics going on. And I was sitting at my desk and I see like something that I don't usually see, because the schools that I do work at that are like in the suburbs that are diverse, everybody's just mixed together. But I saw a group of white kids kind of in the corner by themselves. I saw like another section with one white student, a girl that was biracial, and then like some other students of other races. And it was just kind of weird because I don't usually see that. But then the kids started kind of coming up to me, and they just it almost turned into like a therapy session almost. They just started, I guess, whatever was on their chest, they just started telling me. And the girl was like, yeah, we don't really talk to them because they call us niggers and they say Black people are disgusting and y'all are slaves. And I was like, so thrown back by that, because that's like, stuff like that goes on because racism exists and it will most likely always exist. But you don't imagine you're going to see that from a group of 7th graders. So I just kind of observed, and the dynamic was weird. And she was just like, yeah, this happens every day, and the teachers aren't doing anything about it. And they won't believe us. And I just told her, I was like, there's nothing you can really do about it, unfortunately, because in an area like that, it's not really going to get taken seriously. Because I was just having a very real moment with her that it's really nothing you can do, unfortunately. I told her the best thing to do was to just document this and keep track of it, so that where if anything ever happens, you have a record of that they've been doing this. And I felt so bad, I almost wanted to cry, because I just can't believe that they would have to go through that on a daily basis. And the fact that nobody wanted to do anything about it, because I believe the majority of the teachers at that school were white. There was an administrator that was Black, but then everybody else, I think, was white. And I remember I wrote a note to the teacher. I was like, I didn't hear anything personally said, but you really need to keep an eye on this, because you shouldn't have a child going to school worrying if somebody's going to say something that crazy to them. And you're 12 years old. You should not have to go through that. So I never had to go through anything like that personally. So I felt like I'm kind of in a way privileged among Black people that I didn't have to deal with these things. There are certain things in our state of Georgia that you might not see in other states, that another Black person might be like, I'm not gonna deal with that. Because I do see you might see a lot of Confederate flags. Like there's a cemetery that's kind of not too far away from me where I think it's a Confederate cemetery. I don't think it's that old. It's just a cemetery that is probably majority white, and they have each headstone has a Confederate flag on it. And some people might say like the Confederate flag isn't racist, but there's really not a reason to have that, because it was against the Union. So you can't say you're a pro-American, but you're supporting what was against uniting the states. So you're gonna see things like that here. And there's certain places here that are actually like 10 minutes from me that are restaurants that I just wouldn't feel comfortable going in because I don't feel like there's a reason for me to go to a restaurant that might not want me as a customer when I could go somewhere where I will feel welcome. But a lot of people don't have that ideology. They feel like because you do have the right to go anywhere you want to in the United States, but some things I feel like it's just better for me to be where I'm most comfortable. And that kind of goes back to some people who went to HBCUs because they feel like they want the HBCU experience. I actually was accepted into Clark Atlanta University, but I decided not to go. I decided to go to Arizona State, and I liked it here. But some people prefer other colleges. Another part of that is the Divine Nine, which if I scroll this up, you can see what they stand for. You may be able to read it. You can have, I'm not going to read all of them, but you can see them. These are Greek organizations that were created around the same time a lot of these HBCUs were starting to be created because they wanted, it started mostly just for like socialization and networking and trying to, create a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood among these HBCU members. So you can see, I didn't include a lot of pictures of them, but you can see like a lot of the AKAs, which stands for Alpha Kappa Alpha, they wear the pink and green, and then the Deltas, they'll wear black and red. And this is another thing that like going up to the school that's where all the teachers are black, all the students are black, you kind of see it. It's like a part of that was just kind of integrated. Like somebody might be like, oh, I'm sorry for this, but they would have Founders Days, which is the day that their organization was created, and teachers would wear like their college outfits. They have like their certain, like you can see the symbols that they're doing here. They would do those. They might have some type of, dinner or something for the teachers. And it's just all stuff that is just integrated. And I'm doing this presentation because I just wanted to really give a informative look at the lesser known parts of Black culture. Like most people are not gonna, have an experience where the teacher gives you extra points because you colored something pink and green because that's their sorority color. Like that's the type of stuff that we grew up with. So, and they also take it very seriously. Like they're very secret. It's basically secret society, but just at the collegiate level. So you have to be enrolled in a college to join. If not, it's very hard to get in. And they don't tell their initiation processes. They don't tell, any of the stuff that it takes to get into it. They're just going to tell you after they've been initiated that they go, and they're very proud of it. So another thing that I want to talk about is Black media. So 2 of these are out of print, but they were very well known and well liked magazines. You have Ebony magazine, which was just a Black magazine, Black culture magazine. It was from about the early 1900s to like up until around like 2012 to 15, as people just started using less and less paper. So as well as Jet, these are both still produced, but they're just not printed anymore. So if you want to see, like, as far as I know, one of these is either going to be Ebony, I believe, is still produced, but Jet may not be produced. But you can still always see old issues of it, or you can see, you can sign up to get subscription to it. The Final Call newsletter is the newspaper that's still produced and printed by the Nation of Islam, which is the organization of the person I talked about earlier, Elijah Muhammad. It's now the leader of the Nation of Islam now is Minister Farrakhan, but it originally was called Muhammad Speak, but now it's the Final Call. So you might see usually the people, the men who are called the Fruit of Islam or the FOI, they'll usually might be in a Black area selling these for like a certain price, or they might see them selling fruit. They sell fruit because Nation of Islam members are known for having a very healthy diet because they follow not only the diet that's spelled out in the Quran, but they also use certain things from a book that's called How to Eat to Live, which was written by Elijah Muhammad, and it kind of details the best way to eat if you want to have a healthy life. So this is a magazine that's still active. So now I'm getting into more recent time. I just want to cover Black shows because this is also a very integral part of Black American culture. I picked these shows for a reason. A Different World is based off of what I just talked about, the HBCU culture, and the show is actually inspired a lot of people to go to HBCUs because they felt like seeing these people who were written to be college age, having fun and just being themselves, it inspired them to go to college. So that's a very influential show because it was based off of a fictional HBCU called Hillman. So the whole plot of that was just that they were in college, they were at this HBCU, they had stories that were relevant at the time during the late 80s and early 90s. So that was very influential. Another show called Living Single, which was about a group of younger Black adults who lived in New York. And this show is really credited with being, it was what people say Friends was copied off of because Living Single came out before Friends. I don't know because I've never seen an episode of Friends, but I hear that this was the blueprint for Friends because the plot was that they were all living together. It was these four women all lived together, and then they had these two men as neighbors in their brownstone apartment in New York, and they would have episodes where they were just dating or they were just hanging out or like, just a sitcom, but it was very influential at the time because it had an all Black cast. In the 70s, Good Times is a very important show because the actress Esther Rolle is the woman right here in the red. She was given the script by Norman Lear, who was a very popular producer at the time. He produced a lot of Black shows, a lot of non-Black shows. He produced All of the Family as well as this, a lot of others. So Esther Rolle was given the script because Norman Lear wanted her to be the mom on the show because she came from another show where she played a maid. I think the show was called Maude, and they wanted her to be it. But in the script, it was written that they didn't have a dad. And she refused to do the show until they wrote in the script that she was going to have a father for her on TV children. So the show was about a group of Black families growing up in the projects of Chicago and just going through life as like, a poor Black family just trying to, make it. Another interesting fact about this show is that Norman Lear and the writers felt that it would be too controversial and white people would not want to watch the show if they had a militant character that was a man. So they didn't want to put the militant character as this character here in the purple named JJ or the dad, James, because they felt like people didn't want to see that. So they made the character Michael very militant because this again was the 70s when a lot of the Black Panthers were still around. And he had that mindset of like trying to fight the power mindset and we have to stand up for ourselves. But the son JJ was almost seen as the quote coon character because he came up with the dynamite thing, and a lot of people said that they didn't want to see that type of stuff. And I think that's another reason why John Amos, which is the real name of the James character, he kind of left the show. He left it partially for Roots, but then he also, a lot of the cast actually had issues with the JJ character's performance because he did a lot of like jive talk and was like dancing and just kind of almost a buffoon. But that was ironically what kept the show going. So that's one thing about that show. If I go down a little bit now, we see a TV show named Rock, which is a little less known because it was only on for a few seasons. A lot of people actually say this show was canceled for being, I'm sorry about that. A lot of people were canceled for this show. People say that the show was canceled because it was too positive. Because Rock was it was a drama and it would sometimes have comedic moments, but the show had a lot of themes of very important issues that were going on in the Black community and that are still relevant now. For example, they had an ongoing thing where a drug dealer moved into the neighborhood and was selling drugs. The neighborhood started to go down. And the character here named Rock, he stood up against that character and he rallied a lot of people from the neighborhood to get this person out because he didn't want to raise his children in that type of environment. So this was like what I would really consider one of the best shows from that time because it addressed issues in a way that was still like entertaining. And it was very realistic of things that were going on at the time. So, and also we had shows where they had a episode where they actually united like different members of the community, like the characters they had the Nation of Islam on there, they had other religious leaders, they had like the thug character that wanted to do the right thing, but would have that edge to where he's like, I'm still from the streets, but I don't want this to keep going on because I'm done with that lifestyle now and I see what's a better option for us. And then going back to the 70s, the Jeffersons was very influential because it was one of the first times we saw black men and women on TV doing well. So a lot of people might credit other shows with that, but this is really the first time we saw that. It wasn't and going back to this a little bit, if I move this out of the way, you can see the Esther role. She came from a show where she was playing a maid. So the only time you would really see black people on a TV show is if they were a maid or some just background character that wasn't really seen as important. So the Jefferson show had George Jefferson on there as the main character with his wife, Louise. And then they had another famous actress here who played their live-in maid. She went on to go to another show called 227. But this was because he was basically a very affluent man. And he was also a spinoff of the show All in the Family. Because a lot of the dynamic on All in the Family was that, if you ever heard of it, it was about a man named Archie Bunker and his family. And the Archie Bunker character was racist. But on the other side of that, the George Jefferson character was the opposite of that. People could say that he was racist and that his character really didn't like white people. So they had that dynamic on there, which made him a very powerful person on that show. So if I go a little bit more into media, I could talk about movies. The Blaxploitation era was very critical because at the time Hollywood was failing, and a lot of people don't know that Blaxploitation movies is what saved Hollywood because a lot of the stuff that was coming out at that time was people didn't want to see it. If you go a little bit further, you could talk about the Boys in the Hood movie, which is considered a classic movie because it was about a group of black men that were going through a lot of what some black men during the 90s and like late 80s were going through as kind of drugs were in certain communities. So it was about them trying to like growing up together and trying to really do the best with their situation. Because in certain areas like California and Chicago, it wasn't really in the South. Drugs weren't really in the South as much by the 90s they were, but kind of 70s through 80s, it was a lot more in the North, which is why a lot of the gangs started. And this movie kind of talked about what it was like from the perspective of, okay, I'm in this situation. I can't really get out of it, but should I keep going with this lifestyle? Should I try to change it? What I do when I want to change, but people around me don't want to? So that's why it's considered classic. Moving on, the movie Friday was just a comedy movie, but it also had some of that same theme of, growing up in a low income neighborhood and just kind of just trying to make it, but it wasn't a drama like Boys in the Hood was. It's a comedy and it had the same theme. So a lot of Black 90s movies, what some people call hood movies, I don't really use that term, but they were all kind of based in areas like New York or Chicago or California, because those areas were seen as the most populous areas for Black people, even though Black people were spread throughout the country. Those areas had a lot of crime, a lot of drugs, and a lot of negativity, and Hollywood kind of zoomed in on those. Especially in California, since a lot of the gang violence was going on there. The gang violence kind of shifted at this time because originally those gangs were started to protect the community, but at some point it kind of got mixed in and just completely got away from their original meaning, which is why people see it as a negative now. The movie Soul Food is a drama movie, and it was kind of about just like the plot of the movie was that there was a black matriarch who ended up, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it's an old movie, so she ends up dying from health complications, and then she kind of just leaves this mess behind because she was supposed to be the rock of the family, and then everybody kind of things just start to fall apart at that point. And it's about them trying to piece their lives back together after the loss of their mom, and just just like kind of a heartfelt story that was black themed. So that's also considered a classic for that reason. And it was centered around like the Sunday dinner soul food idea, so that's why it's titled Soul Food. So speaking of soul food, um, the Black American diet has a rich origins of that came from slavery because since nobody at that point you were an American because even let's say your family had came over here like 100 years ago, you probably weren't going to keep those same traditions. You would try to, which is why there's bits and pieces from all different parts of the world, but Black American culture, especially the food, really was turned into a new cuisine. So the term soul food originated in the 1960s, but nobody's really saying that term before then. The reason this diet was created is because the enslaved were given discarded cuts of meat like organs, intestines, and various body parts. They could eat their own vegetables that they grew. Sometimes, most of the time, they wouldn't have that good of a diet though. A lot of times, it would just kind of be like slop or mush that was just kind of made together because they weren't seen as people, so they had to eat probably the same thing the animals were eating. So this type of food is very difficult to cook, which is kind of again why the Sunday dinner thing comes from because it takes hours to prepare these meals. So you have to cut out on a Sunday because Sunday was the only day they may have to rest, even though they most likely didn't. It was the day they could maybe go to church and might have a little bit of time for themselves. And it kind of went on the same day, the same because now Sunday is still seen as the only day of rest you can have because you might be working and doing things all throughout the week. So I can kind of move this out the way. You can kind of see there we have like wings, yams, some other type of barbecue meat, greens, macaroni and cheese, and collard greens. This is kind of a typical meal that you might see in a Black American household. It doesn't really represent it now because a lot of people are moving towards other type of diets like vegan diets, other type of meatless diets. They're like it's kind of shifting, but this is kind of the traditional way of eating. And I just wanted to include this picture because I felt like it's always nice to see historical figures outside of their the historical context. So this is at a restaurant called Pascal's, which is still in Atlanta. The location, I believe, got burned down, but they rebuilt it, but it's still a restaurant that serves the same type of food. So this is Dr. King and his wife, Coretta, and some of their associates enjoying a meal at the Pascal's restaurant. Please remember to put comments or questions in the chat because I do want to feel engaged. I don't want to just feel like I'm just talking at everybody because I wanted everybody to just kind of feel like, educated by this because I know a lot of times when there's a racial discussion, certain people might feel like they need to feel guilty about it or they need to feel bad, but there's really no reason to because it's not, the Black American story is not a story of sadness or a depression. It's a story of triumph. It's a story of achievement, which is the point that I wanted to make throughout this whole discussion is that everything wasn't that sad. This is a story of people who were stripped of everything and just slowly over time rebuilt it and made their own. So something else as we close out is that a lot of the foods that Americans traditionally enjoy, like barbecue, were first invented during slavery. And the barbecue method, the American barbecue method, even though people use it all over the country, it was used during this time because, again, to cook those very tough cuts like ribs or maybe a brisket, you had to cook it for hours. So there'd be like an open pit, and then they'd make maybe a grill, and they put the food on top and just cook it for hours. Because a lot of times, and these meals weren't really for themselves most of the time. The meals would be for the slave owners and if they had guests. So a lot of these big meals, including what I'm about to talk about here, were for entertainment. So the people would cook and they might be able to recreate that if they're able to get something, but mostly it was just for the slave owners and their guests. So James Heming, who was the brother of Sally Heming, which Sally Hemings, if you don't know, was, some people try to make it seem like she was some type of girlfriend or mistress of, I believe it was Thomas Jefferson, but she was like 15 at the time and he was an adult male. And also she was enslaved, and enslaved people can't give consent to sexual activities. So you can kind of see what that means. So that's who she is, the sister of James Hemings, who was another enslaved person. He was enslaved by George Washington. And as the story goes, George Washington wanted a special dish for his event. So he ended up coming up with this baked macaroni and cheese dish, which is a very traditional dish for Black Americans, because a lot of Black Americans don't really eat macaroni and cheese that is not baked. So this is kind of where that came from. And I want to include this because it kind of shows like another origin of like where this food came from, how did we start eating it, and things like that. And I just felt like that was an interesting fact. And to close out, I just wanted to include some pictures again to drive home the point that this is not a sad story, and it's not a story anybody should feel bad about. It's not, because none of it is, especially for anybody's now, anybody that stayed and listened that long was actually interested in this information. And even though like we're not directly involved with this, so it really is, nobody should feel bad, especially about it. Like the whole white guilt term, that shouldn't exist because there's no reason to feel bad for this. You might could feel kind of like, oh, that happened, like just like anybody would for something so tragic. But this is a story again of achievement. So I included here just a few pictures that I just thought really interesting because I really like seeing people from history outside of that historical context. So here I have, you might recognize a couple of these people. I have Dr. King with one of his daughters. I have Rosa Parks, who she was a Native American, is what a lot of people don't know. She was partially Native American. She was considered herself Black, but she did have a lot of Native American ancestry. I have again Dr. King and his wife, Coretta. Here's a picture of Rosa Parks in the 90s. She's getting her hair done. And here is Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali with their children. And then here is Malcolm X's wife, Betty Shabazz. So as I close this out, I really thank everybody for coming, and I'm really glad I got to share this with you all. Hopefully it recorded so I can actually put this on YouTube, because I know this was a lot of information, because we covered about like 200, almost 200 years worth of information in like an hour. So you can feel free to go back to this, share it with people that you think might find it interesting. And I just thank everybody for staying. And if you are a guest, don't leave yet, because hopefully somebody could put the link to get your swag bag in the chat. But I did thank everybody for coming out. And I'm just so excited that I got to share this information with y'all, because I always love the opportunity to teach. So if you learned anything, I would really like to know if you learned something. So does anybody have any type of questions or comments? Because I just felt like I just wanted this to be very enriching experience for everybody involved. I see comments. Let me see.
Yeah. Oh, I'll read mine if you prefer.
Okay, I can look at it. Thank you, Nicole. Okay, I see. Right, Nate put it in the chat. Okay, can you read? Where's yours? Oh, wait, okay, I see. I never see that. Yeah, that's why I didn't mention it, but it's called